Google's Chief Sustainability Officer, Kate Brandt. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you for being here. We're excited to be chatting with you about this. I wanted to pick up on something that Jason said.
Absolutely.
Which is how AI can play a huge role in addressing the climate crisis. Obviously, this is something that you've been really vocal about. Would love to start there, and can you walk us through some of the ways that you all are thinking about how AI can be used to help address such a critical challenge?
Absolutely. And first, thanks so much, Bennett, for being here with me, and great to see you all this morning. Hope you're doing well. Yes, so just to kind of start from the beginning with Google, Google has been an AI-first company since 2017, and what we've been really focused on is how do we use this technology to improve people's lives, to grow the economy in positive ways, and really putting this very powerful tool behind solving the world's greatest challenges, whether that's around healthcare, around science, and certainly around the environment. So when we think about AI as a climate solution, I very much agree with Jason. There is a huge opportunity space here. And we published a report a little over a year ago with BCG that started to bound what did that opportunity look like. And that report postulated that by 2030, AI could help accelerate existing technology solutions such that it could reduce emissions an additional 5 to 10%. That's roughly the equivalent of the emissions of the entire European Union. So big opportunity. And as we have been really digging in to look at what are AI's superpowers when it comes to climate and developing climate solutions, both from a mitigation and an adaptation perspective, we found kind of three big areas. One is around information, giving people and organizations much more helpful information. The second is optimization. AI is really good at looking at complex systems and showing you how to optimize them. And then the third is prediction, and that is especially true when it comes to weather and extreme weather events. So I'll just share with you one example of each of those to give you a flavor of what I mean. So in the realm of information, one thing we know is that we want to deploy more solar on rooftops more rapidly. And so we developed a tool called a solar API, which is for solar developers. And this is using aerial imagery of buildings. And then we trained a model to help understand what are the parameters of a roof that would make it good for solar. And then developers can actually site solar without going to see the facility, which cuts down on cost and speeds things up. So then if you think about optimization, we know that one of the really hard to abate sectors that we're all working on right now is commercial aviation. I know for me, that's my biggest climate sin, is getting on planes. And aviation is about 3% of emissions globally. And you may have noticed in the most recent IPCC report, they said, about 1% of all those global emissions, a third of aviation emissions, are coming from contrails, those white plumes that you're seeing in the sky. But notice you only see them sometimes. And so we teamed up with Breakthrough Energy and American Airlines to use AI on top of satellite imagery to first better understand why are those contrails forming, and then actually to reduce them. And so we ran a series of test flights with American, and we just had the pilots do slight changes in their elevation, and this reduced contrails in half. So just think about that. One AI solution, if scaled globally, could potentially get rid of 0.5% of all global emissions. And then the last example I'll just share with you is in this area of prediction. I mentioned AI is really powerful when it comes to weather. We have weather models that are becoming really good at prediction. And we're using that around extreme weather events. And I know we've all been following these really devastating wildfires in LA. I live in Northern California. I have lots of friends and family that were impacted. And we see AI as a great way to do earlier prediction of wildfires. And so we teamed up with the Moore Foundation a couple of months ago and launched something called FireSat, which is actually a constellation of satellites that will be able to detect wildfires in 20-minute increments and catch them when they're about the size of this room, about 5 by 5 meters. So that will be really powerful in getting to wildfires more quickly. And those will be coming online later this year. And then even before that, we've been using AI to do really good real-time monitoring of the boundaries of fires and putting that in Google Maps so that as people are trying to evacuate, they have that information. So those are just some of the examples I would share that give you that flavor for that potential, but also what we're actually doing right now.
Absolutely. No, it's fascinating to think that even as we sit here kind of in the first inning of AI deployment and innovation, that we're already seeing these big chunks of potential emissions being addressed. And would love to maybe kind of turn the focus kind of internally for you as well. Obviously, as you said, Google's been an AI first company for a while now. How has that kind of AI growth within Google and that focus, how has that impacted your sustainability efforts?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really deeply focused on data center energy efficiency, on running our operations as efficiently and sustainably as possible from the very beginning. In fact, one of my former Google colleagues who started this work many years ago, Amy Christensen, is sitting right here. So I know we always stand on your shoulders, Amy. But the way that we have really looked at this is in order to unlock that huge potential of all those AI solutions that I was just talking about and many more, we need to also really responsibly manage AI's footprint. And I think, our first two speakers, both Ricardo and Jason, spoke about this a little bit, about this discussion of AI load growth, which is a really important topic. And I might just add sort of my own perspective on top of theirs, because that was a really useful discussion that they were offering. So something that I like to think about is, as you look at this phenomenon of load growth, certainly driven in part by data centers, but also by a whole variety of things, by electrification of buildings, vehicles, actually increasing demand for cooling, because in many places the world is getting hotter. So this is both a sign of economic growth, it's also a sign of adapting to the impacts of climate change. And the IEA did put out some research recently that said by 2050 we will need 2.5x the amount of electricity that we have today. So we know this is something that needs to be addressed over time. But also when you zoom in on the data centers, today data centers represent, depending on what you look at, roughly 10 to 15% of GDP that's been enabled. And their electricity consumption globally is about 1 to 1.3%. So that's very efficient use of those electrons for that economic output. So I think that's just another good piece of context. And all of that being said, and some of this was discussed well by Jason and Ricardo, we don't have really great forecasts yet for what that load growth will look like. There's a lot of speculation, but a lot of it depends on the level of adoption, what we're able to do in terms of deploying clean energy, and other factors. So that's why we're actually working with people like Columbia, like the IEA, to have better research so we can get a better handle on what are those different scenarios. And in the meantime, we're really doing everything that we can within our operational control. And so for us, that's everything from how we build our data centers to get even more efficient. So compared to 5 years ago, for example, we're getting 4x the compute power out of the same amount of electricity. And then we're also looking at how we're training our models. That's where a lot of the power consumption is going. And we've published papers, because we want to share these best practices for other AI developers as well, that enable us to reduce the electricity demand 100x, the emissions even 1,000x. So that's a lot of work on the efficiency side. And then, of course, carbon-free energy, which I know we'll get to, and we talked about a little bit earlier in some of the other sessions. The more that we can power this with 24/7 carbon-free energy, the cleaner it will be.
Would love to pick up there, because I know that there's been a lot. You've been working hard on this across Google over the course of the past year. Tell us more about that, about how Google is kind of innovating the energy system and how you're working to bring more clean energy into your own kind of footprint and
Yeah.
there.
I love how Ricardo started to tell this story for me, and he was exactly right. So, we've been in the clean energy procurement space at Google for a really long time. We signed our first power purchase agreement back in 2010. And then as we got more sophisticated and as we started really learning more about what does it take to get to really deep grid decarbonization, we said, you know what, it's not just about matching our electricity consumption with renewable energy somewhere in the world. We actually want it to be on the grids where we're operating and on an hourly matched basis. And so that's our commitment to 24/7 carbon-free energy. So we've made a huge amount of progress since we've been on this journey for a long time. We have a portfolio now of 14 gigawatts, a lot of wind and solar, but also some advanced technologies that I'll talk about in a moment. And that represents a commitment to about $16 billion of spend on clean energy. So we're really very serious about getting this clean energy online. And we were hearing a little bit in the earlier conversations too about additional clean, firm sources of power that are going to be so critical to this equation going forward. And so for us, that's advanced nuclear. There's been a lot of talk about nuclear recently. We announced an agreement with a company called Kairos, which is a small modular reactor developer, for 500 megawatts out to 2030 and beyond, using an order book model that's been recommended by the Department of Energy. So we're very bullish on advanced nuclear and also on advanced geothermal. We've been working with a great company called Fervo, and they have already cut the ribbon on their first site in Nevada, which is helping to power our Nevada data center. And then I think just the other thing that I would point to is, in addition to the need to keep developing more of these clean, firm solutions and getting them on the grid, Jason was starting to get at this as well, there is the need for policy and regulatory change. And we need to make it easier to get these projects online. There's very long interconnection queues. We need to improve the structure of electricity markets. So that's going to be another key piece of the puzzle in addition to the technology development and deployment.
No, that's fascinating. And we're almost out of time, but before we go, I mean, in addition to your role at Google, you have a fascinating point of view and perch among your peer group of all these chief sustainability officers across major global companies. I know you've been meeting and talking with a lot of them this week. We've got a lot of sustainability leaders in the audience as well. How, as you enter those conversations, like how do you think that chief sustainability officers should be thinking about using AI as a tool in their own companies, even far outside of tech? Like how can they use that as a tool for their sustainability efforts?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you asked this, because this is exactly the conversation I've been having with people this week. So a couple things I've been sharing. One is, I mentioned how AI is such a powerful tool for optimization. So we've been working with a lot of companies through Google Cloud to help them do optimization of routes, for example. We have a partner called Geotab that's working with companies to do better optimization of delivery routes, which can reduce fuel, can reduce costs. And similarly, also supply chain optimization. We work with companies like Unilever to help them with their zero deforestation goals, to get much deeper insights into their supply chains and to be able to drive towards those outcomes that they want to achieve. So that's one area that I see a lot of opportunity for CSOs. And then the other is, as we know, there's a lot going on in the world of sustainability reporting, both voluntary and regulatory, and my team leads all of that work, so I'm very, very close to what's happening there. And we've been experimenting a lot with how can you use Gen AI to support a sustainability reporting team in generating those reports. And then we even did something pretty cool last year when we released our annual report, our environmental report. We had a Notebook LM experiment that's effectively a chat interface with the report. And as we all know, these reports can be kind of dry and long, but now you can just query the report and say, like, what was Google's Scope 3 last year, or any question you want to ask. And so I think that's going to really revolutionize both how we do reporting and then how our stakeholders can interact with that information.
That's amazing. I know a lot of folks who have to work on those sustainability reports, which can often be a bear to compile, are probably really excited to hear that. So,
yes.
No, that's fascinating, and so many great examples of how Google can innovate at scale, and to hear how you're bringing all these tools to your partners to help them increase those sustainability goals is so exciting. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, thank you so much. Please give it up for Kate.
Thank you, Bennett.
Appreciate it.